Over 20 years ago, when I started my professional photography career, I started with Nikon, and I had no intention of leaving Nikon. But after starting fstoppers.com and shooting more and more video, I realized that Nikon cameras were falling behind very quickly. For a while there, we were shooting stills with Nikon, but we switched over to Panasonic cameras for video because they had unlimited record times. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, we switched over entirely to Sony cameras because they could do it all. They were great still cameras, but they also recorded amazing video, no record time limit, and of course they have unbelievable autofocus as well. Believe it or not, the last Nikon camera that I held in my hand was the Nikon D850, which came out 7 or 8 years ago. So what have I been missing with Nikon gear these last 8 years? I have Nikon's top of the line Z8 camera here, 2 of their pro lenses. I am very excited to test this gear out and compare it to my Sony gear. Let's do it. This feels very much like my old Nikon D850, a much larger grip than my Sony cameras, and for my large hands, I find this camera to be much more comfortable. All right, I'm gonna let this thing charge up. Let's open up the lenses. All right, this is the 24-70 2.8S. It has some sort of digital display on the lens itself. The zoom ring on this feels really nice, really, really nice. Here I've got the 70-200 2.8S lens. The zoom on this feels even better. Maybe one of the smoothest telephoto zooms I have ever felt. All right, enough talking. I'm gonna let this thing charge up and then let's take it outside and start using it. This video is sponsored by Imagine AI. If you are a volume photographer, maybe you're shooting portraits or weddings or events or sports, and you have thousands of images that you need to edit after every single job, this is the software for you. Unlike so many other AI editing softwares that are on the market, Imagine AI actually helps you cull the images before editing the shots. So it's gonna analyze every image. It's gonna find the subject in every single shot. It's going to determine if the images are in focus, if the subject's eyes are closed, if you got another better shot 3 seconds later, and it's going to categorize all of these images for you completely automatically. If you have your own signature look, you can train the AI model by uploading old Lightroom catalogs to get Imagine AI to edit just like you, or you can go through their catalog of editing styles made by other professionals to get the perfect look for your images. If you want to try this software, use the link down below. You can get 2,000 free edits, and if you decide to buy, use the code FStoppers15 to save 15%. Now, the first thing I noticed when I took this out and started shooting with it was the digital viewfinder. It's quite good in this camera, but I just wrapped up filming a review of the Sony A9 III, which is their newest top-of-the-line sports camera, and the digital viewfinder in that camera was incredible. I looked up the specs on both because I'm like, why does the Sony seem so much better? And sure enough, it has almost 3 times the resolution of the Z8. And I know I'm making the Z8 sound bad. The Z8 is actually the 3rd best digital viewfinder I have ever used before. The Sony was just that good. And the 2nd best I have ever used is on an unreleased camera that I have right below the desk here. I'm gonna be releasing a video on that in approximately 2 weeks, so stay tuned for that. But the bottom line is the digital viewfinder on this is certainly better than my older Sony cameras that I currently own, but cannot compete with the newest Sony A9 III. The next thing I noticed about this camera was the autofocus, and as you can imagine, massive, massive upgrade over my older Nikon D850, and one feature that I really like with this camera is it has auto subject detect autofocus. Subject detect and eye detect autofocus is the newest craze, and once you use it, you really don't want to go back to like the single point autofocus where you're moving it around the screen and finding your subject. The camera kind of does it for you and it finds your subject's eye automatically. But other brands, I believe even the newest Sony that I just used, kind of forces you to choose what type of subject you're gonna shoot. So if you're gonna shoot planes or cars or people or animals, you have to go into the menu and set that ahead of time. The Nikon has this auto detect feature that lets me shoot people and it will recognize that person, lock onto them, and then I can move over here, take a picture of a dog, it's gonna lock onto that dog's eye as well. And you don't have to go into the menu and make changes. And for most people, they might just leave it in that setting all the time, which is super convenient. I went outside with the 70-200 and I photographed some professional tennis players, and literally every shot I took was in perfect focus. Now, my favorite feature on Sony's A9 III, their top-of-the-line sports camera, was their pre-capture function, which allows you to ready the camera, silently take pictures in the background, and then when you actually take the picture, it will save images taken some amount of time in the past. This camera does have that same feature, but it has a couple of strange limitations. One, you can't use it and shoot RAW at the same time. If you want to use pre-capture, you're gonna have to shoot JPEG, and honestly, for me, that's not that big of a deal. But what I did find annoying is that I don't believe Nikon allows you to set the ready button or the pre-capture button to any other button other than halfway pressing the shutter release button. And the problem with that is sometimes you just want to take a single image of a still object, but because you're in that pre-capture mode, the camera is going to save 30 pictures or more of the same stationary object. One thing that I really liked about Sony is that it gave me the option to move that ready function to another button. I moved it to the autofocus button on the back of the camera. So when I just wanted a single image of a normal subject, I could just press the shutter button and take a normal picture. But if I was about to take a picture of an animal and I was hoping that they were going to do something, I would line it up, hold that autofocus button on the back, and that would start pre-capturing in the background. And then when I press that shutter button, it would take that picture, plus it would save all of the images taken 1 second in the past as well. Separating the pre-capture function from the shutter button is a game changer, and it allows you to keep the camera in this pre-capture mode all the time and only use it when you need it. I don't think you can currently do that on Nikon, but this would be such an easy firmware update if Nikon happens to be listening right now. It's kind of hard for me to compare autofocus systems between cameras when every camera is almost flawless these days, but I did notice a few little things with the autofocus in this that are worth mentioning. One time I came upon an iguana and I tried to photograph it, and the camera would not recognize it as an animal, and it wouldn't recognize the eye of an iguana. And I know that's like ultra niche case that the average person would never run into. But last week I was just shooting with the Sony A9 III and it was locking on to the eyes of iguanas perfectly every single time. Manual tracking also doesn't seem quite as accurate on this camera as it is on my Sony cameras. That's when you touch on the back of the screen on a subject. This camera has a problem with locking on, and then as the subject moves or as the camera moves, that point has a pretty significant drift. So depending on what type of autofocus you use, or if you're taking photos or videos, that may or may not be a big deal to you. Now, it seems like almost every modern camera has incredible autofocus, especially when you're talking about taking still photos. Every camera is amazing now. But you can start to notice a difference in autofocus speed and accuracy, especially when you're recording video, and that's when I use autofocus the most anyway. I did one comparison test between the Z8 and my Sony a7S III, which is a pretty old camera at this point in comparison. I felt like the Sony might have been slightly better at locking onto my eye and keeping me in focus, but because I was shooting at 24 frames a second at 1/60th of a second, it's kind of hard to tell what's focus and what's motion blur. So I did the test again in brighter daylight at 60 frames per second. We can watch it back here in slow motion, and I have a much higher shutter speed here, so there's no motion blur at all. You'll notice that both cameras have flawless autofocus with a stationary subject. You're not gonna be worried about, autofocus pulsing or anything with either of these cameras. But when I start to move really quickly, you can notice that the Nikon camera struggles to keep up with some of those movements. That being said, I don't know how often I'm actually shooting a subject moving this quickly, this close to the lens, but still worth showing. Now, I've mentioned many times just how similar this camera is to the Nikon D850, but it's even closer than you might think. The sensor in this camera is completely new technology with much faster read speed, and it doesn't require the need for a physical shutter at all anymore. Meaning that when you take a picture with this camera, there's no moving parts, and the sound that it makes is a fake shutter sound that you can turn off if you want to. I come from a background in wedding photo and video, and so that feature is incredible to me. I have been in many churches before where they tell me I'm not allowed to take pictures because my camera clicks. Well, it doesn't click anymore. It's completely silent if you want it to be. And then of course the super fast read speed of the sensor cuts down on rolling shutter and the jello effect when you're shooting video as well. All that being said, the actual resolution of this sensor and the overall image quality and the ISO performance of this camera is almost identical to the Nikon D850, which is a 7-year-old camera. I was definitely shocked by this. I wasn't necessarily expecting more resolution, but I was definitely expecting better ISO performance than a camera that came out 7 years ago, but I guess we kind of peaked, didn't we? Now, even though the sensor has a really fast read speed and it doesn't require the physical shutter, it is not a global shutter like Sony's brand new A9 III. And that means that even though the Sony camera can sync flash at literally any shutter speed, this camera cannot. This camera still has a maximum sync speed of 1/200th of a second. And if you want to go beyond that, you're going to have to move into high-speed sync mode. So it's still going to work similarly to a DSLR in that sense. Now, the feature that I was most excited about to test out with this camera was video. Video is the entire reason I left Nikon to begin with, and I've heard that this camera has incredible video functions. It can shoot in 8K if you wanted to. You can shoot in subsampled 4K or downsampled to 4K for ultra sharp 4K footage as well. And this camera can shoot in RAW video if you wanted to. So being that I had never shot in 8K or in RAW before, it was definitely something that I wanted to test out. I knew that filming in RAW was going to require a special memory card, and so I made sure to get the one that was recommended for 8K in RAW. This is the Lexar 256, 3,400 megabytes per second write speed. Not megabits, 3,400 megabytes per second write speed. Certainly the fastest memory card I have ever tested. But when I put it in the camera for the first time and I set the camera to 8K, 60 frames per second in RAW, guess how much recording time I had? 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That means every 20 minutes, you're recording a terabyte of data. That is outrageous. So I went outside and recorded only a few seconds of 8K in RAW footage, and when I got back on my computer, I realized Premiere cannot read the files. I looked into it, and apparently the only application that can currently edit these files is DaVinci Resolve. I literally watched every video currently on YouTube about Nikon in RAW and how to edit it. And it's the most convoluted, confusing color grading I have ever seen in my entire life. And being that this memory card can only record 5 minutes of this footage anyway, I thought, you know what, maybe in RAW is not for me. But if you're interested, Adobe just made an announcement that later on this summer, Premiere will finally be able to open and edit that footage if you want to use it. Now, this is an amazing video camera. The 8K footage looks unbelievable. And even if you're not going to export an 8K file, just having the ability to crop in and move around in 4K and not lose any resolution is pretty nuts. If you make a very quick change in exposure, like if I racked my aperture from f2.8 to f22 or whatever, you'd expect it to get dark immediately. That's how every camera I've ever used does it. This one doesn't. It has this like slow, nice ramp as it gets darker. And it's kind of frustrating at first because if you're just trying to make changes rapidly, you know, before you actually start recording, you're like, come on, what's going on? Why is it doing this? But then I realized, oh, it's creating smooth exposure transitions to every change I make. So with all of my Sony cameras, I think the only way to do that is with an auto ISO setting, but there's no way I can make smooth aperture changes. But with this camera, and maybe just with Nikon lenses, I'm not sure, it has the ability to slowly and smoothly stop down and open up that aperture, which is something I haven't seen in another video camera like this. I have really enjoyed using both of these Nikon lenses, just the way the zoom feels on each one of these. It's just so nice. Image quality out of both has been fantastic. As you would assume, they're not cheap. Unless I'm missing something, the little LCD screen that Nikon puts on the top of these feels kind of like a gimmick to me and extra cost for something that I will definitely never use. It is off by default, and then for you to actually see what that screen says, you literally have to press the display button, which kind of defeats the entire purpose in my opinion, but maybe there's somebody out there who likes this feature. I ran into one very strange problem with this camera. If I plug this camera into a Windows laptop, it works perfectly. A folder pops up in Explorer, you open the folder, and there are your files. When I plug it in to my Mac, nothing happens. I have to go into this application called Image Transfer, and from that application, which is a massive pain in the butt to use, I can transfer some files. But when I tried to transfer 8K files, it froze up. It didn't work. So then I downloaded Nikon's proprietary software. I think it's called NX Studio. Look at this. It's been stuck on transferring 3 of 11 for like 10 minutes now. Never in my life have I had this much trouble getting the files off of a memory card. So every time I wanted to transfer 8K video files from this camera, I had to boot up a Windows computer that I never use. Very strange. Next up, I wanted to test out stabilization. This is something that I feel is a little bit lacking in Sony cameras, especially when you compare it to my older Panasonic video cameras. The Nikon has in-body stabilization, which means the sensor itself is moving inside the camera to counteract your movements. But if you want to go even further, you can choose to film in 4K, and that opens up the option for digital VR or digital vibration reduction. Now, as I was filming this looked amazing on the back of the little screen, but when I got back to the computer, I realized just how awful this looks. I was shocked by how much rolling shutter you can see in this footage, being that the read speed of this sensor is supposed to be so fast. However, I did learn if you put the warp stabilizer filter on this footage in Adobe Premiere, you can fix most of this rolling shutter, but it still has a slight pulsing effect. Now, I know I've been comparing this camera negatively so far to the A9 III, but in many ways, this actually is a superior camera to the A9 III. This has almost double the resolution, which is going to give you much better still images, but it also gives you the ability to shoot that 8K video if you want it. And it turns out that the technology required to make the global shutter on the Sony actually means there's a hit to the ISO performance. So you're gonna get better images and video in low light on this camera as well. If I was still shooting weddings and portraits, I think this might be the absolute best tool for the job. But being that I film myself all the time for these YouTube videos, I have a couple of major issues with this camera. As you can see right now, I am recording myself with the Z8, but I have no idea if I'm exposed correctly. I have no idea if I'm in focus because I'm by myself and I can't flip the screen out to the side and see what I'm doing. So I downloaded the SnapBridge app, and for the next 20 minutes, I stood out here in the sun trying to connect the camera with Bluetooth. The first 3 or 4 times I attempted this, it would connect to the camera, but it would bring up this screen where you're supposed to click on the camera and it would just be totally blank. I did some searching online and found some forums where people said, oh, you just have to sit on this screen for a full minute and eventually the camera will show up. So that's what I did. It did show up after a full minute of standing here waiting like an idiot. And then after that, it failed. And I had to restart the process again and again and again. I never got it to work. Okay, there's a second way you can try to connect. The camera produces its own Wi-Fi signal. You connect your phone to that signal and then the app should just work. And I actually got the app to work for a second. I saw live view on my phone. It was working and then error. The whole thing shut off. I have no idea what happened. And then when I went back to try to figure out what was going on my camera, everything on the camera was just black. The screens were off. If I looked at the top screen, it just said PC. I couldn't use the camera at all. Everything locked up. I'm trying to now use the camera, but the camera is off because it's connected to a smart device. It's been so frustrating to be out here in the heat, trying to make this app work, never getting it to work, film this entire segment right now, not knowing if I'm actually in focus. I'm actually gonna have to put the Z8 back in my case, get my Sony camera and refilm this again, just in case something's going wrong right now. You can see why this is a problem. And while I'm complaining about cameras' screens, let me complain about these thick bezels that are on almost every mirrorless camera screen. If you look at my older Sony camera over here, the bezels around the screen are gigantic, especially when you compare it to modern technology and smartphones. And it's even worse on the Z8. It's got this gigantic frame, and then it has an additional black bezel inside the thick frame. There's so much wasted space here. It feels like this screen could be 50% larger with the exact same footprint here, and this is such an important feature of modern cameras. Why haven't they upgraded this yet? If I was still shooting weddings, this absolutely could be my perfect camera. The camera has great autofocus and plenty of resolution to crop into after the fact. This camera has modern video features, full 8K resolution if you want it, and the ability to film in RAW if you need it. All that being said, I keep having to remind myself that this camera has almost identical image quality to the 7-year-old Nikon D850, and they actually still sell that camera. So anyone who's considering buying this camera needs to ask themselves, are you gonna be using any of those video features? Do you shoot video at all? And are you shooting subjects so fast that you need top of the line autofocus because the Nikon D850 simply couldn't keep up? I have to say, for 99% of photographers, they might actually prefer the optical viewfinder on the Nikon D850, and you can save thousands of dollars by buying that camera. I think this just goes to show how incredible the Nikon D850 was when it came out 7 years ago. The fact that they can still sell that camera today and that camera can compete side by side with Nikon's current flagship camera, it's pretty nuts. But maybe that's the case for every major camera brand. For the last 5 or 10 years, we really haven't been paying for higher resolution, more dynamic range, better ISO performance like we were 20 years ago. Instead, we've been shelling out money for faster, smarter cameras that can lock onto subjects more quickly and shoot with a higher frame rate and record video in crazy resolution. But if you don't need or use those features, your old camera might be plenty good enough. So based on my strange YouTube use case, this is not the best tool for what I need it to be, but it very well may be for you. So if you're considering the Nikon Z8, absolutely check it out. This camera is fantastic, and it makes me so happy to know that Nikon, my first love, has finally caught back up and in many cases surpassed the competition. And real quick, before I go, I just wanted to mention that we are running photography contest every single month at fstoppers.com/contest. It's 100% free to join. You can upload pictures right now to whatever contest is running today. It's free and you can win thousands of dollars in prizes. Check it out at fstoppers.com/contests.